Another upload already? Oh my god, it's a miracle. Lost media has kind of fallen by the wayside these last few years. It seems like every instance I see of people not in the lost media circle talking about it is in some kind of disdain, and even some of the more jaded members of the lost media community are moving away from discussing it as much. It's kinda lost its energy in my opinion, but where there is an absence in the lost media hype train to be filled, I will proudly take up the space. Because I love lost media, I want to hear about the same 9 things from 30 different YouTubers' perspectives, and I am not kidding. I love humanity. I love diversity. Today I'll be talking about 5 different pieces of lost media you may or may not be familiar with. Hero 108 is an often forgotten animated series that aired in 2010 on Cartoon Network, running for 2 seasons and reaching its predetermined conclusion by 2012, rather than being cancelled, which is an honor to behold for any cartoon, might I add. Reruns of the aired episodes lasted until 2013 on Cartoon Network, and continued to air on Cartoon Network's partner channel, Boomerang, until 2014, when it finally officially left the air and was made available on Kabillion's YouTube channel for easy streaming. The show was heavily stylized and based on general Chinese mythology, with loose inspiration being driven from the Chinese novel Water Margin, which follows one protagonist and 107 of his companions, accounting for a total 108 heroes, who make up the entire premise and title of Hero 108. This number is significant in the plot of the cartoon, in the form of 108 heroes who are chosen to bring peace back to the world and unify the humans and animals, after one very evil man convinces the animals that the humans are evil and want to hurt them and are their enemies. As a child, I thought this was stupid. Why would any one group of people listen to one man's self-serving lies? But nowadays I can't help but ask if maybe this perhaps holds a mirror to anyone you can think of in real life. The show focuses on one main set of heroes who are referred to as First Squad, consisting of Lin Chung, Jumpy Ghostface, Mystique Sonia, Mighty Ray, and Mr. No Hands. I love Mr. No Hands, whose name is a lie. He canonically does have hands, they're just locked up and trapped under his clothes like a dog with a comb collar, because he's cursed to tickle himself all the time. I'm not making this up, this is true. Yes we, are all standing Mr. No Hands. The show also sometimes has episodes that involve a more minor group of characters who make up the Second Squad, both of which are made up of heroes included in the 108 and work for Big Green, which is the coalition dedicated to restoring peace and balance in the world, led by the Commander 8 Truly, who definitely is a human. No further questions will be needed. I love this show. I have very fringe knowledge of very minute things about Chinese mythology and culture, and I can't not say that this show might have 1 or 2 offensive or inaccurate things about it. It was a kids show in 2010 that, for whatever reason, had its development and production split up between a French studio that was later transformed into a subsidiary of an American studio or something like that, a Taiwanese studio, an Irish studio, and a Chinese studio, and from what I can make straight of available information, was animated by a Filipino studio, oh my god twinning, had predominantly American writers and voice actors, and had the same creator as Puka. Do with this information what you will. That aside, the physical appearance of the show and the action-oriented plot made it a relatively popular show on the channel for the time being, enough so that the show actually landed its own toy line that I didn't know about. That being said, one of the co-producers on the show was a company called Gamania that specializes more so in developing video games. And I think this fact was the reason why Hero 108 ended up getting its own online MMO sometime between 2010 and 2012, called Hero 108 Online. Learning that this show was probably made just to peddle toys and merch makes a lot of sense in hindsight now. The game seems like it was similar to stuff like RuneScape and World of Warcraft, or like Wizard 101, where you would choose one of the first or second squad characters to play as, who were sorted into different combat classes. It looks like you'd fight enemies out in the world, and there were a few different areas to explore, even having some harder looking boss fights. The literal only evidence I can find of this existing is some really old footage from when the game was in its first launch state, and some promotional materials. It does look like there were some customization options for your character, and quests you could do for experience and in-game items and different equipment. A little menu visible in some of the footage I can find suggests that there was an option to add friends and chat with other players. All of this is pretty run-of-the-mill MMO stuff. I mean, the company who helped produce the game and partially produce the show also helped make MapleStory, so that has to be a good sign, right? It goes without saying that this MMO has been shut down for more than a decade. I've genuinely never seen anyone talking about this outside of a now dated forum forum post I found while researching the thing. Considering that the show only really ran for 2 years and reran an additional year, and also considering that the physical toys for the show only sold for like a brief blip in time, I'd wager that this MMO didn't run for much more than a year or so. The dates I found for the show's airing along with the pre-release of the toys and MMO altogether suggest that all three launched at roughly the same time in 2010. There's very little footage online of people playing the MMO, and there are no public rewrites or any public information regarding any fans' attempt to rebuild the game. Gamania has undoubtedly moved on to other things by now, and it's unlikely that they still have any of the remaining assets or game files. I find it incredibly interesting that among the sea of MMOs that were being made in the 2010s, this one probably has a pretty good chance of claiming the most lost title, with its only saving grace being those few videos. If you happen to play this game or have any personal footage of it, let me know. Maybe poke around on an old computer. With the way lost media works, there could be some downloaded or cached files from the game still lingering around on old hard drives just waiting to be found, and I would really love to see anything come of this. I genuinely find it fascinating. I could keep going about the show, about this game, but I can't, or we'll be here forever.
This year we're celebrating 35 years in business.
Did you know we've come up with 6 all-new value combo coupons? And if you sign up for our coupons, and if you email
We're celebrating 35 years in
pizza and get a free medium
It's just our way of saying thank you for making Marks part of your family for over 35 Marks.
I will talk about the Muppets at every opportunity presented to me. You know these guys, right? I don't have to tell you who the Muppets are. That's supposed to be your parents' job. The last time I talked about them on the channel, they were in sort of a slump, but the Muppets are back, baby, with a very successful TV/pitch pilot for a Muppet Show reboot, airing in February of 2026, and plans for a retheme of the Rock and Roller Coaster ride at Disney's Hollywood Studios in Florida, from Aerosmith to the Muppets, going forward. Despite their stellar success in 2026, I wanted to discuss a concept for a Muppet movie that never made it out of conceptualization. The cheapest Muppet movie ever made was a pitched concept for a movie following the Muppets attempting to produce the cheapest Muppet movie ever made. More accurately, it would have followed Gonzo creating his own movie on a budget with Kermit's permission. The pitch detailed Gonzo writing up this movie, called Into the Teeth of the Demons of Death, with a basically nonsense plot, and then spending the little money for the movie so early into the film's creation that it starts to become noticeably more and more cheaply produced the longer the movie goes on. I think this is a hilarious idea, and the more hilarious part of it is that one of the only things that kept this movie from being officially produced was declining budgets within the Jim Henson Company. Brainstorming for the movie went back as far as 1985, with ideas being thrown around between Jim Henson, Jerry Jewell, and Frank Oz. However, after Disney's acquisition of the Muppets, the company started to look into potential ideas for a new Muppet movie. While they did eventually land on going forward with 2011's The Muppets, following the Muppets reuniting after an in-universe years-long hiatus of The Muppet Show, Disney was originally interested in additionally picking up and producing the concept for the cheapest Muppet movie ever made. They were so sure of the idea that they even went as far as announcing it as the next upcoming Muppet feature-length film at 2009's D23 Expo, showing off a single image of the movie's title card. No additional information was shared about the possible production of this movie at the time, nor was any potential footage shown, deeming it pretty much dead in the water at Disney by the end of 2009, as The Muppets rather took up its production time and budget starting in 2010. The next time it was ever mentioned was in 2013's book, Jim Henson: The Biography, which confirmed the title of Gonzo's movie and explained the vision for a few more of the movie's scenes and planned plot lines. So what about this movie is really lost? Great question, as long as you're asking me genuinely and not being an ass about it. Lost media isn't lost, it's just inaccessible to you. you. I'm about to make you inaccessible. It's unclear how much of this movie had any physical media produced for it, whether it was mostly spoken spitballing between the company's writers, or if there were any notes or potential screenplays or script work done. I say that considering how long the idea stuck around within the company, surviving past the Disney acquisition and even going as far as almost entering production, there is surely some material out there that the company is still holding on to for potential future use. I do find it unlikely that this movie would get made today, considering that Disney is only just now using the Muppets to a fuller potential, but also considering that the movie is a pretty experimental idea, and Disney right now is so afraid of potential failure that they'll do anything to keep everyone from thinking outside of the box. I think it's more likely that they'll just disclose some more information about the concept before they'd ever greenlight actually making the movie again, and only time will really tell. I made a video about this, but I haven't talked about it in a while and I need to or I'll blow up, but everyone under the age of like 45 is familiar with the Chuck E. Cheese brand in some capacity. I think I speak for all of us when I say that it's been like watching a beloved family pet contract rabies to see Chuck E. Cheese's decline in just the last 5 years, but today's topic will be discussing the chain's much brighter and more well-loved past. The background of Chuck E. Cheese and its fatefully intertwined existence with Showbiz like rocket power. The background of Chuck E. Cheese and its fatefully intertwined existence with Showbiz Pizza Place is an almost comically complicated tale to regale, so I'll just generalize it for you instead. Chuck E. Cheese's and Showbiz Pizza are two once separate chain restaurant brands known for their use of animatronic animal performers. After a history of producing shows with their characters, and following a merger of the two brands that saw Chuck E. Cheese's characters continue to be used, and Showbiz Pizza's characters' rights being retained by their original creator, almost 2 decades worth of additional shows with various newer animatronics were produced by the Chuck E. Cheese company. Again, I do have a video covering this in more depth, I'll link it in here. You don't gotta watch it or anything. What? No. Between 1977 and the late 90s, various show tapes were created for a variety of different animatronics used by the company. These were very much physical tapes that could be played with any given animatronic, with their set of animations programmed to that show tape, which also included their voice lines and supporting effects and music tracks. Basically, the entire show outside of the physical animatronic was stored on these tapes, and that's where the lost media comes in, is these tapes, whose components are regarded separately in terms of audio versus the actual signal inputs for animations and such, so I'll make sure to discern where I need to. There are a myriad of never produced, experimental, or one-time pitched animatronics whose show tapes were never mass-produced and haven't been archived, just as much as there's certain shows that were widely distributed across the chain's locations and also weren't archived for whatever reason, whether it's because the animatronic didn't end up being very popular, or the specific show tape itself was maybe seasonal, experimental in and of itself, or only used for a brief time. I wanted to just cover a couple of different still lost tapes that I find interesting. First of all being Madame Oink's portrait show tapes. Madame Oink was most well known and remembered as a half-body animatronic present at many Pizza Time Theater locations. Pizza Time Theater was the initial name for Chuck E. Cheese's, and notably made her debut at the first location in the form of a now less documented portrait appearance, wherein she would take the form of a smaller half-bodied animatronic set into a portrait frame. This was how a majority, if not all, of the restaurant's animatronics were displayed for the first 5 or so years of the brand's existence. The audio in particular for Madame Oink's portrait shows are deemed partially lost, and the signal inputs are completely lost, the tapes being incredibly hard to come by, considering that they would have been produced in the late 70s and only used up until around the early to mid 80s. I'm particularly enchanted by animatronics that only got one show and were only installed in a handful of locations. I find them so charming, and there's enough of them to basically make up a whole video talking about them, which I will probably do eventually, but in this case, I'll be talking about BB Bubbles, the animatronic piano-playing elephant, who was actually the third attempted retheming of a piano-playing animatronic at some Chuck E. Cheese's locations. The animatronic was half-bodied and confined to a single room of their own called the Cabaret Room, which housed the animatronic and their piano, as well as sitting room to watch the performance. Since BB was the third iteration of the concept, only one tape was produced for the animatronic, with the audio being partially found and the signal inputs becoming completely lost. Her run was even more limited than that of Madame Oink's, with the first animatronic being installed in a few locations in 1982 and officially cut from further production and installation in 1983, being promptly removed from the locations that even had her to begin with, making these tapes incredibly rare. Because of the nature of the Chuck E. Cheese company's efforts at image preservation, when old assets become obsolete and are no longer in use, they are required to be destroyed. The only hope of finding some of these tapes would be through former employees who are still in possession of discontinued tapes, or potentially through anyone who helped produce them in the first place. Old tapes do show up for sale, whether it's randomly in person or online. It's just a matter of getting lucky about finding listings for them. Most of the time, people who have these things don't even really know they're lost. Archival of show audio is of course possible through the personal recordings of individuals who visited the locations at the time that these animatronics were in operation. And there have been instances of entirely lost, unaccounted for shows being found in random home videos uploaded to YouTube unintentionally. King Arthur could not pull me out of Overwatch right now. Every month that passes and you're like, I wonder where Zephyro is, I wonder why she doesn't upload very often. It's Overwatch. It's that damn computer. Unemployed final boss, take it up with this fucker, it's his fault, not mine. So aside from being the worst game to choose to spend your free time playing, Overwatch is known fondly for its characters and their captivating writing that has been being expanded on for just short of a decade now. Between the game's content, cinematics produced with the characters, people who have been interested in Overwatch, or maybe even just the story of one or two of its characters, have seen a fair amount of expansion on the characters with an equally fair dry spell in there, but they're definitely working on it now. In 2016, you couldn't go online without seeing one of the game's characters. They're evergreen. They're like Pokemon. Everyone has their favorite one regardless of how much or how little they play the game, if at all. I didn't even have a computer or a console that would run the game in 2016, but I was ready to put it all on the line for Genji. In the very teeny tiny chance you've never heard of the game, it's an online first-person shooter competitive game that has you playing as a myriad of different characters, some of which make up the titular world-defending group of war criminals, heroes called Overwatch, with the most prominent conflict setup pitting them against the terrorist organization Talon, which is also full of war criminals, all forged from the exact same war crimes. You pick your favorite war criminal, and with a team of 4 to 5 other players, you strategically shoot at other players to win the game by completing a specific task either before or better than the other team. The game's narrative between the original title and its successor depends on what year it is in whatever content you're looking at. By the way, this game is set so far in the future that I don't think any of the characters would be born yet in real life. Even just from what the first game alone had to offer in terms of its overall story and the incredibly interesting characters it birthed, people became so attached to these little freaks and just wanted to see more of them in any way possible, which is why multiple comics have been produced by the company Dark Horse, following the game's continuity and featuring many of the characters. They were released fairly recently, I want to say starting in 2020 or 2021 or so there's so much here to explore, and if you're a fan, I can't recommend them enough. I love these people. You could even just shut your brain off and not read a single word and just gawk at the beautiful artwork. Oh damn, Baptiste! I would kill to get my hands on one of these. Comics do still happen for the series, but from what I can tell, they're more so produced either in-house or with the help of commissioned artists, and distributed exclusively in digital form, through Blizzard themselves. You can even read a few of them in the game, and they're voiced over and everything. Sorry, I'm a nerd. This game is incredible and so much fun when you don't have some shithead in your ear who still calls Cassidy by McCock telling you it sucks. Even though the comics that most fans are familiar with are a pretty recent development, there was an attempt closer to the first game's release to make a graphic novel not too unlike the comics. Overwatch First Strike was a planned graphic novel, also to be handled by Dark Horse, with a 2016 release date for digital and a future date slated for a physical release in 2017. It was supposed to follow the core founding members of Overwatch and detail their lives before the events of the game, and go into depth about their personal backgrounds, expanding on their origins in the story. The game released in May of 2016, and the story would have been seamlessly backed up by the release of the accompanying comic later in November of that year. But as fate would have it, the comic's cancellation was announced by the lead writer at the time, stating that there were directional differences with the story, that so much development had been made on the game's story since the comic was being developed, that things about it just strayed away from what was being written into the game, irreparably so. If I had a nickel for every time a game I really liked was supposed to get a comic giving a huge amount of context and lore development made by Dark Horse that got cancelled for some hellish reason, I would have like 0.2% of a Wu Yang skin or something like that. The cancellation was announced the month the comic was set to release, so close to the date that it can be pretty safely assumed that most of the comic was finished. Only a few pages were shown off and lack any text giving them context, since it's been almost a decade since the comic was last acknowledged by Blizzard, and there have been multiple installations of completely different comics with completely different focuses since then. I don't see that the full thing will ever officially see the light of day, but it would be interesting to see what was different about it and what direction they decided not to take with the story. There was probably so much old man yaoi in this. I haven't talked about Fire Emblem in a minute. If you don't know, Fire Emblem is a combat-based strategy RPG series made by Intelligent Systems and published by Nintendo, and is considered one of the company's smaller anchor projects, and a pretty significant title nonetheless. While this is true enough now that there have been 17 main entries in the series and an upcoming 18th, there was once a time in the 2010s where Fire Emblem was performing pretty poorly in its sales and wasn't being as positively regarded, with the most relevant detail in Fire Emblem's data chart here supporting that claim being the fact that the first 10 games released between 1999 and 2007, averaging about one game every year and a half. However, 2007's Radiant Dawn, which in and of itself was already a sequel to the GameCube game Path of Radiance, was reviewed with high praises but also criticized for its difficulty at the time, both of these factoring into sales for the title diminishing, with an almost 30,000 copy discrepancy between Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn. For comparison, 2004's Sacred Stones for the Game Boy Advance and the series' second worldwide title sold 700,000 copies, whereas neither Path of Radiance nor Radiant Dawn sold much above 500,000. There would be a palpable gap of 5 years between Radiant Dawn and the title succeeding it, Awakening, which released for the Nintendo 3DS in 2012, selling 2 fucking million copies! Thanks in part to some of the game's characters being included in the more popular Super Smash Bros. Games, bolstering their popularity, Fire Emblem was so back. Thus began the pattern of taking more time to create Fire Emblem games, and between 2012 and 2026, counting Awakening, there have been only 4 major games, with some remakes and spin-offs in there that I don't necessarily count, but some of them make up the 17. I don't know how to describe it. Anyway, all of this is to say that Radiant Dawn was the only game to see a Wii release, but it was not the only Fire Emblem title that was being developed for the console. The experimental tech demo dubbed Fire Emblem Wii was a proposed Wii Fire Emblem title being worked on closely after Radiant Dawn's development and release window. Sourced from the Making of Fire Emblem book published in 2015, we learned that this title was being built as a sort of departure from the typical gameplay of the series. Fire Emblem is most well known for the chess-like grid layout of its maps, upon which you control the placement and actions of your army in relation to the enemy army you're facing on a given level. You control every precise movement and adjust your character's placements one by one, giving you the freedom to strategize, plan ahead, and take the time to think about your actions. However, this concept had more of a Pikmin feel to it, having you face your enemies in real time, by which I mean basically telling your guys, go, fight, come back in one piece because there's no option to disable permadeath for another 5 years. You would control one whole group at once rather than painstakingly carefully placing every unit you have. There's no plot, not even a clear structure, or general UI to tell us anything from the available images, and while the test does reuse some assets from Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn, it was never confirmed or denied that this game would have anything to do with those entries. It seems like the player was allowed to explore a few different areas freely, perhaps in a similar fashion to a similar mechanic in 2017's Shadows of Valentia, which was later expanded on in the eternal flame of discourse that is 2019's Three Houses. We were given some concept art for the game and some proposed controls, with content supporting the idea of free roam gameplay. But again, other than this handful of components, there was no real single tangible goal with this demo, other than seeing what types of things were possible. This demo was never made public in any capacity, marking it as fully lost with no real hope of finding it unless it were released officially, or maybe leaked by someone online who worked on it and may have access to it. That's a wrap on this one. I was kind of surprised I was able to find a couple topics that I don't think I've seen anyone cover, even though a fair amount of these examples have articles up on the Lost Media Wiki. Usually I have more to say at the end of these, but I really don't. I'm happy I was able to get another video made. Let me know if you've heard of any of these. They were pretty fun to research, and I would love to see if anybody has any experience with any of them, or maybe like a thing or two to add. I don't know. Until next time, bye!
This cat is deep. This cat is this cat is rude. This cat just died. Something devilish has been brewing within me for years on end that will only escape through the means of physical violence. Guys of cringe. I find fishy. I find fishy. I said watch your tongue.